Thank you, Susanna. We're thrilled to be here at this amazing festival where you're bringing together so many diverse voices. So let's jump right in. Henry David Thoreau said, "It's not what you look at that matters, it's what you see." I love this quote. It tells us that perspective matters more than our circumstances or our challenges. Changing our perspective has the power to change us. I'm Jenny Wu, Chief Product Officer of Understood. We're an organization whose mission it is to shape a better world for those who have learning disabilities, or what we like to call differences. You may have also heard them referred to as neurodiversities, cognitive differences, or invisible disabilities. In the world of learning and thinking differences, perspectives matter a lot because people with learning and thinking differences see the world from a slightly different perspective. And unfortunately, our world often isn't designed for them. To create products for people who see the world differently, we have to try to see the world from a different point of view, which can be a powerful thing. A year and a half ago, we were all given that opportunity. The pandemic forced us to look at how we engage and interact with each other at home, school, work, and digitally in new and different ways. Powerful movements this year fundamentally shifted social issues from just starting conversations to beginning to see progress. In part, this was because people's perspective around the urgency of some of these issues shifted. Maybe you've had the opportunity to walk in someone else's shoes and look at something through their eyes. Perhaps this has driven you to advocate for change or strive to make something better. Today, I'd like to invite you into the world of those with learning and thinking differences, such as ADHD or dyslexia. In the next 15 minutes, I hope to leave you with a better idea of why it matters that we shape and improve gaming for this group of people, as well as some suggestions of where we could start. When you step into a game, you have an opportunity to be in a world of imagination. You can step into an avatar's shoes and imagine that you're in that pretend world for a short time. But what if you find parts of a game challenging? So much so that it stops you from playing. Playing games is both physical and mental. So when you find that crucial elements are missing from the game that make it playable or fun, for you, it becomes a barrier. A recent YouTube video from the Checkpoints show described an experience years ago with the Final Fantasy franchise. He loved the freedom of choice, but found it difficult to play with his dyslexia. He was confused due to the inaccessible font and didn't feel a part of the experience. He ended up having to watch as his sister played. Several years later, we haven't made as much progress as needed. Gaming consultant Cherry Thompson shared on IGN that accessibility in game design is still deeply misunderstood. It's about barriers, not difficulty. With the wrong focus, we might miss wider opportunities to welcome more players. Even with improvements in more recent games like Sekiro: Shadows Die Twice, there's still room for more accessibility to avoid people feeling shut out completely. 70 million people in America have a learning and thinking difference and experience these barriers and difficulties every day, feeling alone or misunderstood. And this includes those who play games. 70 million. That's 1 in 5 of us. Or put differently, the size of California and Texas's combined populations. Chances are that 20% of the people watching this talk right now have some sort of learning and thinking difference. But many people aren't even aware that these invisible disabilities exist. Many people don't get tested or diagnosed, which can lead to struggles at work, in school, or in their communities where they may not have valuable or necessary supports. These people also face increased school dropout rates, bullying, and even incarceration. Understood research says that 60% of parents whose kids have learning and thinking differences say that their kids have fallen an entire year behind in school, compared to only 16% of parents of neurotypical kids. Kids with learning and thinking differences were also 3 times as likely to have experienced depression related to schooling challenges, and 43% of parents of these kids report facing financial burdens, twice as many of those parents of typical kids. Learning and thinking differences are lifelong brain behaviors like dyscalculia, trouble with math, auditory processing disorder, or those you may have heard of, like ADHD or dyslexia. There are many people with different diagnoses across the range of learning and thinking differences, and each of these people have a unique experience and may need a different type of support. As someone involved in the gaming industry, this could mean various ways to support these people in the games we make. But first, we need to make an effort to understand this very large population, how they learn, think, and feel. It's important to step into their shoes and try to understand the stigma around learning disabilities and how it often leaves them feeling alone and misunderstood. I've gone through this journey myself. I was brought to understood to design products that would better support those with learning and thinking differences. And truthfully, I was surprised by some of the challenges that I encountered and discoveries in my journey so far. One of the many of the user experience best practices I'd learned in my career weren't accessible for people with learning and thinking differences. For example, presenting information in multiple forms so that people can digest it in whatever way works best for them runs counter to product design best practice, which says you should only offer one option to simplify the experience and prevent decision fatigue. So Understood, like many companies focus on delivering compelling digital experiences, uses design thinking to center on the needs of our users. And when using design thinking to create social change and build truly inclusive experiences that meets the needs of the neurodiverse, it can really shine. It helps us to innovate around accessibility. Rather than starting with what we must satisfy from a compliance standard and working backwards, we look at the experience from the user's perspective to uncover new pain points. By asking ourselves what will work best for users with learning and thinking differences, we can build products that work better for everyone. The first step is to talk to users to uncover and solve their problems, to truly understand and empathize with their experiences. So to help us understand gaming from the perspective of someone with a learning and thinking difference,
My name is Brooke, and I have an auditory processing disorder. Essentially what that means is that while I hear sounds loud and clear, just like everyone else does, I struggle to translate the speech into meaning. Sometimes this presents as mixing up the sequencing of words that I've heard. I struggle with auditory memory, both short-term and long-term, and I mix up sounds really easily. My younger brother was born with a rare heart defect and was dependent on oxygen and a ventilator later in life. So a huge part of his life revolved around games, and we all got into them so that we had a way with playing with him. So I think we started playing video games when I was about 6 or 7. He actually learned to read from playing video games and reading the video game pamphlet. I love first-person action adventure games. I love puzzle games and RPGs. Because I really struggle with auditory memory and some cognitive memory issues, I really appreciate games that have built-in game accessibility, such as being able to refer to game logs to show what I've accomplished and what I've done so far. I really appreciate games that have some sort of navigational system built into the gameplay For example, Zelda Ocarina of Time, you have a small fairy that directs your attention and helps focus where you're supposed to go. The fairy's name is Navi, which is literally short for navigation. So I always find her helpful. The gaming community is so vast. There's so many different types of games. There's so many different types of game players. And I think one of the most wonderful things about it is that each game and community that surrounds it's almost like a tide pool with its own ecosystem. I think some of the stigma that gamers face is very similar to the stigma that those with learning and thinking differences face. We're thought of as lazy or inattentive, detached from the real world. And I just don't think those things are quite true or quite accurate. So I think there's a lot that we can do in the community to spark conversation and to encourage people to participate, because there's so much good that I've experienced from video games.
Wow. So, like I said earlier, perspective can be a powerful thing. Take Two, along with Games for Change, Susanna, and others, provide a perspective for many of us at E3, talking about the problems around discrimination and alienation in gaming. Surprisingly, there's not a lot of research out there to shape our vantage points around people with learning and thinking differences and gaming. While there is increased awareness of accessibility issues in the gaming industry with the efforts of Able Gamers and others, and while some companies have been developing accessible game features like Microsoft's Xbox or Naughty Dog, these are mostly around physical disabilities. They are more geared towards movement, vision, or hearing. What we do know, games can have both positive and negative implications and effects for people with learning and thinking differences. So, similar to the movement and increased attention around physical disabilities, we want to encourage the same for invisible disabilities. So, let's look at the relationship between the neurodiverse and gaming, starting with the positives. In moderate gameplay for someone with a learning and thinking difference, we often see higher emotional stability, reduced stress levels, increased social interactions, happiness, and life satisfaction, an enhanced sense of achievement, and greater psychological resilience. Rewards that we find in games are motivating and fun and reinforce confidence, something that often those with learning and thinking differences struggle with. Games give permission to fail safely and improve from trying over and over again. If your player dies, you can try again. This is a best practice for cognitive differences. There's no penalty for failing. And because gaming stimulates and encourages reward seeking behavior, it helps those with learning and thinking differences see progress and feel success as the game progresses at their own pace. Social connections can be challenging for someone with a learning difference, so those formed through games can be particularly powerful. In co op games and MMOs, players have shared goals, which fosters teamwork, collaboration, and communication. Players empathize with one another as they experience trauma, grief, or struggles within the game. While these can be beneficial connections for many players, it can be particularly helpful for those with learning and thinking differences. Additionally, gamification can be an effective instructional tool as a replacement for or supplemental to other means of instruction. For people with dyslexia, for example, some studies have shown that gaming can help with reading speed. And while they're not replacements for evaluations, gamified tools can also contribute to diagnoses. On the other hand, there are negative implications too around gaming and learning differences, particularly when there's overuse or potential addiction. Concerns ranging from aggressive oppositional behavior, decreased academic achievement and performance, hobbies being sacrificed, and decreased sleep or work are all effects of too much play. People with ADHD, which can come with mental health challenges such as depression or anxiety, have a reciprocal relationship with video game addiction. And gaming is very attractive because it provides stimulation to hold their attention, allows them to hyper focus with repetitive actions or visual stimulations, and reinforces reward seeking behavior. So while these people may often be power gamers and users, they also might be the most vulnerable to overuse and these challenges. Additionally, what may be the norm for a typical gamer instead presents challenges for those who learn and think differently. Social norms and conventions in gaming environments can be challenging. Taking the perspectives of others in RPGs, for example, or of your own character can also be challenging. Or sometimes gaming environments lend themselves to personal oversharing. So those with learning and thinking differences may share more than might be socially appropriate. And games, like we found in other life situations for those with learning and thinking differences, may be more susceptible to bullying. Winning and losing can elicit problematic behaviors and expectations. Also, communication with parents who are unfamiliar with gaming can be even more challenging than typical communication. Developers such as EA or Nintendo have found ways to turn some of these challenges into opportunities and build more inclusive gaming environments, including hardware that speaks to people in the 1 in 5 with learning and thinking differences. But there's much more we can do. Some are simply small steps. What we've seen from our work at Understood, and I've seen since I've come on board to the company, is that when you take these steps to design and enable the 1 in 5 to thrive and play, you build better products for everyone. Understood has used design thinking to help us find ways to shift attitudes and ultimately change people's behaviors and elicit positive changes. Because at its core, design thinking is about behavior change. And to create that, you start with empathy. Understanding what motivates people to act a certain way and what questions to ask to uncover their problems makes it possible for them to take action. So, where do we start to create positive change for this group of people within games? Again, the first step is talking to those with learning and thinking differences. There are 1 in 5 people with them. So, chances are there are many in your workplace now, or you know someone who has one. Taking the time and initiative to understand these people's different perspectives is key to molding a gaming product to them. Second, incorporate those with invisible disabilities into the development and design process and specifically recruit them. This is an effective way to enhance attention to accessibility within games, designed for them by them. We know from other industries that including ideas in the early stages of development creates better results. We encourage your organization and others to seek out those with learning and thinking differences. Third, it's crucial to include them in the research and testing phase too, through user testing and focus groups, so that their perspective is included in all phases of the game making process. Fourth, apply accessibility and usability in gaming to be inclusive. For example, build in supports to avoid things that people with learning and thinking differences may find challenging, such as memory barriers or recalling key information to guide gameplay or even login information. A great example, Navi in Zelda keeps the player on track with the overall journey, reminding them of their goal, changing colors to signal specific actions a player should take, and calling out helpful features and tools at the player's disposal. Make sure you offer different ways for people to understand game content and that it's usable to them. Game text should be easy to read and help you focus on vital information by simply bolding or underlining important pieces of text. At Understood, we use a customized font designed for people with dyslexia, Understood Sans, which helps distinguish between letters that look similar, like B and D. And Paradise Killer and Tell Me Why are 2 games that allow you to use a dyslexic-friendly font called Open Dyslexic. Design keys and symbols that guide players from different backgrounds, languages, ages, and neurodiversity World maps, dungeon maps, and navigational tools like compasses all should be easy to understand. These keys and symbols should also be usable by all and take into consideration color blindness and learning differences. Options for voiceovers of text and closed captioning should be available as well. Provide assistive technologies or add-ons and extensions for people with cognitive disabilities. And also, align gameplay design with industry standards for accessibility. For our digital experiences at Understood, we align with the World Wide Web Consortium and aim to go beyond these standards. We take a similar approach in gaming too. Or we can take a similar approach in gaming. For instance, gameplay instructions, character dialogue, gameplay logs, or setting menus can be written at a level that includes an index that defines uncommon words. We can include settings options for narration and text scrolling speed to provide choice, and include a dialogue and narrative log in gameplay options so that history can be referenced throughout gameplay. And customizable in-game settings and control options can be extremely helpful too. There's so much we can do. In games, we have the beginning, the middle, where we tackle some of the greatest challenges, and the end. We're at the beginning of the game. We've only started to scratch the surface when it comes to designing gameplay for learning and thinking differences. Karl Barth said, "Though no one can go back and make a brand new start, anyone can start from now and make a brand new ending." Since you're here, we know that you care about games and the social impact that they can have. So let's not just build a brand new ending, but work to build towards a longer game, one that's changing the game with the neurodiverse in mind. Thank you so much for your attention. And at this point, we welcome you to join my colleague, clinical expert Bob Cunningham, in the Spark Q&A for more conversation. Thank you so much. We'll see you there.